Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, thank you for being with us tonight. You know, so Canada has had a month, arguably months, to get ready for this. So beyond talking to Americans, what has this country done to make Canada more resilient?
We've made significant progress, Adrienne, and the premiers have worked on this in a very real way with the Government of Canada on reducing internal trade barriers within Canadian provinces and territories. That's one very concrete example, which might add up to 3 or 4% to the GDP of Canada. Very important thing to do. My colleague, the Minister of Natural Resources, is looking at a whole series of critical mineral projects, of resource projects, including raising capital from other countries other than the United States to put us in a position to develop some of these projects. But more than anything, Adrienne, we've been working to avoid these tariffs. We think, as the Prime Minister said today, it's not justified at all by any of the objective data at the border in terms of the illicit traffic of fentanyl. But if the President and the Government of the United States has decided to do this, our response, our strong response, should not surprise anyone, including Howard Lutnick in my conversation with him today. Our job now is to stand up, as Canadians expect, for their jobs, for their businesses, for their economy. That's exactly what we're going to do, and I'm encouraged by the unity that Canadians are showing in every part of the country.
You talked about the Canadians wanting concrete assurances. They really do. And I hear you with what you're trying to do, but which barriers have come down? Which new markets have opened up? They really want to hear something crunchy here.
Yeah, so as Minister of Finance, I removed a number of barriers in the financial services sector. Barriers, what these are, they're exemptions that provinces or territories or the Government of Canada have taken under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. So 2017, almost 10 years ago, we signed a free trade agreement amongst all of the orders of government in the country. But as you can imagine, every government had a list of things for their own reasons that would be excluded. People think of the trade of alcohol, for example, direct-to-consumer sales of alcohol. That's a visible, obvious one. A lot of it's around government procurement. Some of it's things like a transport truck that leaves New Brunswick and goes to your city in Toronto would have to change first aid kits depending what province it was crossing. Some of these things were just drags on business. So systematically, many of these things have been, the vast majority of these exemptions have been removed by provinces and territories. And I would think we'll have more good news in the next couple of days.
You mentioned being in contact with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. What can you tell us about your discussion with him today?
So I've maintained a rather open and frankly cordial relationship with Mr. Lutnick. We met at Mar-a-Lago at the original supper before Christmas with the Prime Minister and the President. I saw him again between Christmas and New Year's, again at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and we've kept an ongoing conversation. Obviously on the weekend and yesterday, I wanted to talk to him to understand why the President had made this decision when we believe that all of what we were doing with the Americans at the border and in terms of the fight against fentanyl, which is entirely in Canada's interest, we thought that this was well received by the Americans and certainly a very significant effort by both governments. So I had a brief conversation with him earlier this afternoon. I'm going to talk to him again late tonight. I'm confident that we can continue to discuss a way to frankly get these tariffs lifted on Canadian businesses and on Canadian companies and return to respecting the free trade agreement.
Lifted. That's interesting because he told Fox Business that Trump will reach a middle ground with Canada and Mexico on tariffs and that an announcement to that effect was expected on Wednesday. What does that mean?
Again, I saw that comment of Howard's on Fox News. We're not interested in some sort of reduction of the tariffs. We want the free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico respected. And we'll continue to work with the government of the United States on issues once the tariffs are lifted and the respect of the free trade agreement is returned. So, and I said that to Mr. Lutnick, to Howard this afternoon. We'll see what they come back with as a conversation, but this is not meeting somebody sort of halfway or reducing the tariffs. We We want to ensure that Canadian goods and services can enter the United States free of tariffs. And the same thing, the tariffs that we put in place to respond to this unfair attack on our economy will also remain in place until the free trade agreement is respected.
So the president posted another message today, I'm sure you saw it, effectively saying, can someone please explain to the prime minister that there will be reciprocal tariffs on retaliatory tariffs by a like amount, which I'm sure you have plenty of adjectives for. But there is an argument that when Canada imposes retaliatory tariffs, it will also hurt Canadians. And a lot of people want to know how this makes economic sense to do this.
So I think we have to be honest with Canadians, Adrienne, that the same people that say to us we need to defend the Canadian economy, stand up to this unfair American attack on our economy, the retaliatory tariffs will necessarily not be without pain for Canadian businesses. So we're conscious of that. We talked to the premiers about that today. I think everybody understands that. It's an essential element to convince American businesses and American political leaders that this is not in their interest to do this. It's the American government that has decided to do something that will have very negative consequences for American consumers and American businesses. I think we're realistic. It's not going to be pleasant for Canadians, but they expect their government to take a firm, strong position in the face of this unprovoked attack on our economy. That's exactly what we're doing. But we'll also ensure, and I was reassured by the conversation with all of the premiers today, we'll also ensure that we're there to support Canadian workers, Canadian businesses that are, to your point, going to be feeling some discomfort by these measures as a result of these measures. But it's essential to get us out as quickly as possible from what is, frankly, an untenable circumstance.
The Prime Minister pointed out that the United States is launching a trade war with its closest ally, while at the same time talking about working positively with Russia and Putin. Trudeau said, make that make sense. Is it Canada's view that the United States is now a Russian ally, not a Canadian one?
I'm not, Adrienne, a foreign policy expert. I'm trying to focus on what I can do to strengthen the Canadian economy, to ensure that Canada has economic growth and economic prosperity in a sustained way. The Prime Minister is right. At a time when the government of the United States is talking and choosing these particular subjects with a country like Russia, it does seem somewhat hard to understand why they would attack the economy of their closest ally, both in a security context, but also in an economic context. That's why we're hopeful that American businesses, American industrial leaders will say to their government that this is not a circumstance that's going to benefit the economic growth, the golden age that President Trump talks about in terms of the American economy. I think Canadians noted, and I'm sure Americans did, what happened on stock markets today. So this is sort of a corrosive thing for us to be in collectively. And the faster we can get out of it, the better for the Canadian economy. And continue to work with the Americans as we have. That was my conversation with Mr. Lutnick, was for decades we've worked collaboratively with the United States on economic areas and security concerns that have benefited both countries. So that is a much more constructive focus than applying tariffs on Canada and then Canada responding with retaliatory tariffs. It's sort of a race to the basement that none of us should be on.
Do you still see the Americans as allies?
Yeah, I think the Americans and first of all, the American people and the Canadian people have a long history of relationships. I live in a border province in New Brunswick where literally volunteer fire departments cover one another when there's a fire along the Maine New Brunswick border. That's just an example amongst hundreds. But Canadians are understandably, Adrienne, frustrated, upset at the American government for doing this to our economy and to Canadian workers. And they're understandably, it's certainly appropriate for us to express that frustration. This is an absolutely unnecessary attack on the economic prosperity and security of Canada. It won't benefit the United States, but allies should not be doing this to one another. And that's certainly something that we've made clear to the Americans.
All right. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, thank you for your time.
Have a great evening. Thank you for inviting me on the program.